Well, in his sharply effective State of the Union address last week, President Biden included the best tax policy speech ever given by a Democrat.
Folks at home, does anybody really think the tax code is fair? Do you really think the wealthy and big corporations need another $2 trillion tax break? I sure don't. I'm going to keep fighting like hell to make it fair.
President Biden has been using some of the best lines, most effective lines from his State of the Union address on the campaign trail, beginning the day after the State of the Union. Here's how he began his appeal on taxes today in New Hampshire.
Does anybody here think the tax code is fair? Raise your hand. Well, I don't think so either.
Republicans oppose everything that Joe Biden is proposing on taxes, everything. And so the Biden proposals for a tax code that is more fair depend entirely on our first guest tonight becoming the next Speaker of the House in January. And that depends on you, the voters, electing a majority of Democrats to the House of Representatives. The Democratic leader of the House of Representatives, Hakeem Jeffries, needs only 4 more seats of Democrats in the House of Representatives to elect him Speaker of the House. He will be the first Speaker of the House from New York City, which is kind of remarkable that there's never been a Speaker from New York City. And of course, he will be the first black Speaker of the House. The United States Constitution has exactly one parliamentary rule for legislation. Quote, all bills for raising revenue shall originate in the House of Representatives. That means all tax bills have to begin in the House. It will be up to Speaker Jeffries to guide the Biden tax fairness bill through the House of Representatives, which includes affordable increases in taxes only for people making over $400,000 a year and additional tax increases for billionaires, as well as increases in corporate taxation that still leaves the corporate tax rate lower than it was during the Clinton presidency when the economy was thriving. And while he's at it, Speaker Jeffries will have to guide all of the rest of the Biden legislative agenda through the House of Representatives. But if Hakeem Jeffries is not Speaker of the House next year, then a Republican Speaker will continue to either operate a do-nothing Congress or try to impeach members of the administration or try to take away from the people who take things away from the people who Joe Biden's new budget released today would protect.
Many of my Republican friends want to put Social Security and Medicare back on the chopping block again. If anyone tries to cut Social Security and Medicare or raise retirement age again, I will stop them. Even this morning, Donald Trump said cuts to Social Security and Medicare are on the table again. But the bottom line is he's still at it. I'm never going to allow that to happen. I won't cut Social Security. I won't cut Medicare.
And here's what Donald Trump said on CNBC today about cutting Social Security, Medicare, and Medicaid.
So first of all, there is a lot you can do in terms of entitlements, in terms of cutting.
And of course, later, the Trump campaign issued a statement claiming that Donald Trump was only talking about cutting waste in those programs. And I know everyone thinks there is waste in all government programs, but no one has ever identified any waste in the Social Security program that can be cut or in Medicare. It's worth comparing Medicare to private health insurance. In private health insurance, 17% of the premiums that you pay for private health insurance are not used for health care. They are used purely for administrative costs, executive salaries, and in insurance companies, that also includes advertising costs, massive advertising costs. In Medicare, where the advertising costs are zero, the government-run health insurance program, everything the Republicans have always told you that would lead you to expect that the administrative costs of Medicare must be much, much higher than private insurance. And again, in private health insurance, the administrative costs, including advertising, are 17%. And in Medicare, the administrative costs are 2%. 2. Making Medicare simply the most efficient health insurance program in the world. Donald Trump is lying about cutting waste from Medicare, and the proof that he is lying about that is that in his 4 years in the presidency, he never once attempted to cut any waste from Medicare because his people couldn't find any, and he never attempted to cut any waste from Social Security because his people could not find any. Nor did he try to cut any waste from Medicaid. What Donald Trump said about cutting those programs today was very, very clear. But of course, Donald Trump's presidential campaign knows that it was a very stupid thing to say politically, and so the campaign is now trying to pretend that Donald Trump meant something else. But Donald Trump has said stupider things. In a new book by Jim Sciutto, Donald Trump's third White House chief of staff, John Kelly, tells this story about Donald Trump, quote, he said, well, but Hitler did some good things. I said, well, what? And he said, well, Hitler rebuilt the economy. And I said, sir, you can never say anything good about the guy. Nothing, Kelly recounted. Trump also expressed admiration for Hitler's hold on senior Nazi officers. He would ask about the loyalty issues and about how, when I pointed out to him the German generals as a group were not loyal to him and in fact tried to assassinate him a few times, and he didn't know that, Kelly recalled. After visiting with Donald Trump in Florida on Friday, Hungary's Prime Minister Viktor Orban said that Trump, quote, will not give a penny in the Ukrainian-Russian war. That is why the war will end, because it is obvious that Ukraine cannot stand on its own feet. If the Americans don't give money and weapons along with the Europeans, then the war is over. The same thing was true of Britain when Hitler invaded all of Western Europe and after conquering France was determined to soon have Nazi troops marching into London the way they marched into Paris. And the only way the British survived, the only way, was with military supplies delivered to them by the President of the United States, Franklin Delano Roosevelt, who Joe Biden quoted at the very beginning of his State of the Union address on Thursday, in a speech that President Roosevelt made explaining to the American people why we needed to help the British survive Hitler's attack. The Roosevelt speech that Joe Biden quoted was given a year before the United States was attacked by Japan and then actually entered World War II as a participant in the combat. If Donald Trump had been in the presidency in 1941, when the British needed help to survive, Hitler would have won. We know Donald Trump's father was a Hitler sympathizer. Donald Trump admires every current head of state in the world who exhibits Hitlerian tendencies, like Kim Jong-un in North Korea and Vladimir Putin in Russia, and in his way, Viktor Orban in Hungary. The day after Donald Trump praised Viktor Orban for his dictator-like behavior in Hungary, Joe Biden said this in Georgia.
Here's a guy who's kicking off his general election campaign on the road up with Marjorie Taylor Greene. It can tell you a lot about a person who he keeps company with. And yesterday he was hosting at his club Viktor Orban, who says he doesn't think democracy works. Call him a fantastic leader. Seriously. He bragged about calling Xi Jinping a king. He called Putin, and he said, do whatever the hell you want to our allies. I'm not making these quotes up. When he says he wants to be a dictator, I believe him.
President Biden released his budget that looks like a very big job for Speaker Hakeem Jeffries if you get enough Democrats into the House next year. That Biden agenda becomes the Speaker Jeffries agenda, what for you are the most important things that you believe would have to get done legislatively by the House of Representatives?
Well, we look forward as Democrats to continuing to be supportive of President Biden and his forward-looking agenda. The budget that was released today would continue the effort to grow the economy from the middle out and the bottom up, with a focus on working families and middle-class families and, of course, low-income families all across America. It's a budget that will continue the work to lower costs for everyday Americans. We've made progress in that area, particularly as it relates to driving down the high price of life-saving prescription drugs. And as President Biden mentioned during the State of the Union address, which was spectacular, that work needs to continue, and we look forward to partnering on that. And as President Biden has indicated in the context of his budget, we need to protect and strengthen Social Security and Medicare, not try to eradicate it as we know it, which is clearly what Donald Trump and the extreme MAGA Republicans would like to do.
Could you share with us for just a moment what it was like to be in the room for that State of the Union address? I know they're not all the same, but that one was really extraordinary in the way that the president made it interactive. There were so many lines that he spontaneously came up with on the spot because of what he was getting, negative feedback noises from the Republican side of the House.
You know, it was a hostile work environment that President Biden was dealing with in terms of delivering a State of the Union address with the likes of Marjorie Taylor Greene and others who are completely out of control and behave in a manner unbecoming of a member of the United States Congress. But President Biden knew what he was dealing with. It was high stakes, it was intense, and it was also an electric environment. And his remarks were strong, they were serious, they were substantive, and they penetrated. And he kept it at a high level from the very beginning of his remarks, starting, as you indicated, Lawrence, by referencing FDR and the dynamics in this country during the start of World War II, and he stayed at a high level all the way through to the very end.
I want to listen to more of what the president said about the billionaires tax. This is in New Hampshire today.
You know what their average tax rate is? 8.2% taxes. Anybody want to trade their tax rate? No, I'm serious. If we just charge them, had a tax code that charged them 25%, not the highest rate, 25%. You know how much that would raise over the next 10 years? $400 billion. $40 billion a year. Imagine what we could do. From cutting the deficit to providing for child care, to providing health care, to continue to provide our military with all they need.
As you know, we've been in a cycle for decades now where Republican presidents come into office with Republican assistants in the Congress, and they enact stunning tax cuts that dramatically increase the budget deficit, dramatically increase the national debt. And that's followed at some point by a Democratic administration and a Democratic president who feels the responsibility to rebuild fiscal sanity by increasing taxes. And in that cycle over the decades, I haven't heard a Democrat find the case, make the case in speeches for the Democratic tax policy better than I heard Joe Biden in the State of the Union address and now out on the campaign trail since then. As you know, as the Constitution requires, all tax legislation begins under your jurisdiction in the House of Representatives. The House has to go first. What you're hearing about the Biden approach to taxes, is that possible with a Democratic majority in the House of Representatives?
I certainly believe so, and we support President Biden's vision for making sure that we have a tax code that is centered on economic growth and growing the middle class and all those Americans who aspire to be part of it, and through things like the enhanced and improved child tax credit, which was part of the American Rescue Plan, but then Republicans allowed it to lapse. We want to be able to restore it in the most robust fashion because it was an incredible tax cut for working families, for low-income families, and for middle-class families in terms of returning money into their pockets that could be used for day-to-day expenses. It was a spectacular success. And when you juxtapose that with the extreme MAGA Republican vision, when they had the ability to address tax code issues, what was their response? The GOP tax scam, where 83% of the benefits went to the wealthiest 1% and saddled our children and grandchildren with $2 trillion worth of debt unnecessarily in order to subsidize the lifestyles of the wealthy, the well-off, and the well-connected. So President Biden is leaning into this issue. I think it's a winning issue, but more importantly, it's the right issue for the American people in terms of tax fairness.
To some voters, it's going to sound like too small an issue for a president or for a senator to be concerned about how many potato chips there are in the bag. What's at stake?
Well, Lawrence, I think what's at stake is for so many years now, these companies have been shrinking their product but not shrinking the price. So that's the basic ripoff that we're talking about here. That's why I have legislation to deal with it. But I think in a larger sense, it's about a much greater problem, which is greedflation, which is big corporations jacking up their prices, the cost of food, the price of household items, and raising those prices way above their costs. You know, corporate profits in the 2 years between July of 20 to July of 22, corporate profits were up 75%, 5 times the rate of inflation. That's a ripoff on a grander scale. That's greedflation, and what we need to remedy that is to pass legislation so that the Federal Trade Commission can investigate price gouging, and that's another bill that I have that the president and others I know are trying to pass with us. So we've got to crack down on these big corporations, whether they're engaged in shrinkflation or greedflation, because it's ripping people off, and it's about time we took action against it.
So you're going to see those Biden campaign ads because Pennsylvania is a battleground state. They'll be running on Philadelphia TV. They'll be running on Pittsburgh TV. Not going to see them in Los Angeles. You're not going to see them in New York because they're not battleground markets where those ads are running. Does the enthusiasm that those ads try to build for the Biden-Harris ticket help candidates like you running for Senate in those same states?
No question, Lawrence, because on every one of the issues that the president's ad touched on, I'm on his side when it comes to voting for the legislation to reduce the cost of insulin, the capping it at $35 a month for Medicare Part D beneficiaries. I voted for the infrastructure bill, voted to make sure that we can invest in infrastructure in a state like ours. And on all these issues, my opponent in the race, the Republican candidate who just endorsed Donald Trump last week, he's on the other side. He wants to repeal the infrastructure bill, repeal the legislation that gave Medicare the power to negotiate lower prescription drug costs, and also enshrined in a law that cap on insulin. So on every one of these issues, I'm on one side, he's on the other. So these issues, I think, are front and center for voters, and I would hope that voters out there following my race and following the presidential race, if they're with us on these issues, I hope they go to bobcasey.com.